Good morning. Welcome to the class. The topic that I would now take up is New Wave Drama and Cinema. Now, every age has its own cultural expressions. The new wave in the field of drama and cinema could be anticipated in the twilight phase of the colonial period. It was against the backdrop of the Second World War, the anti-fascist movement, Quit India movement, the passing of the Pakistan resolution by the Muslim League, the Bengal famine of 1943, that one can seek the genesis of this new wave. The pioneers of a new cultural movement from the late 1930s and the early 1940s were the writers, theatre activists, singers, painters, mostly drawn from the folds of the Communist Party. They felt that a cultural movement was the need of the hour because it would be through them that the masses could be educated, and that could also pave the way for mobilization of mass organizations. Now, Indian People's Theatre Association that played a major role in this, abbreviated as IPTA, got its name from Romarola's famous book People's Theatre. The name was suggested either by scientist Dr. Homi Bhabha or by a Ceylonese journalist named Anil De Silva, who also became the first secretary of the IPTA's Bangalore unit. It was with this help that the Bombay branch of IPTA was formed in 1942, and subsequently in the next year was born the All India organization, that is in May 1943. Now, IPTA, though IPTA drew its member mostly from the folds of the Communist Party, but the first bulletin of the IPTA revealed that the sponsors of the Bombay unit were from all shades of political community, including the communists, the congressmen, the liberals, the moderates, the Kisan leaders, the trade union leaders and others. IPTA clearly stated that it was committed to the cause of people's struggle against the ruling and exploiting classes, and it was this struggle that they wanted to portray in their art forms. The first performance of ITA, hence, was before the working class audiences. And interestingly, the playwrights were also from the same class. Now, this was definitely a new cultural experiment for India. The IPTA actually provided a model of organized cultural activism in India, and it was an inspiration for all future artists. Now, IPTA put emphasis on two things. One was realism, and along with realism, it combined the need for revitalizing traditional art forms, because it realized that it was the traditional art forms that had always retained a close rapport with the people. And IPTA, if it actually wanted to portray the people's miseries, the people's distress, the people's grievances, it needed to understand the people's choices. Hence, IPTA abundantly used the traditional art forms. IPTA's main thrust was on art that portrayed deepest human emotions and aspirations, because it felt that art divorced from human emotions have no significance in human life. A non-profit organization, its main aim was at raising the artist voices against all sorts of injustice and oppression, and it realized that art could become a potent medium for this. By this time, it is clear what was the main purpose of the IPTA. The main purpose of the IPTA was to bring about a new cultural movement that would voice its discontent against the colonial tyranny. Now, IPTA was immensely successful, and the main reason for IPTA's success was its ability to draw into its fold the most talented people of the time. Among the actors, there were Prithviraj Kapoor, Balraj and Damayanti Sahani, Chetan and Uma Anand, Deena Gandhi, who would later become famous as Deena Pathak. In Bengal, Bijon Bhattacharjee, Shambhu Mitra, Tripti Bhaduri, Shobha Sen and later Utpal Datta, Ritwik Ghatak dominated the scene. As mentioned before, IPTA became immensely successful because it tapped the sources of popular expressions, popular cultural forms, and gave them the kind of respect and recognition they deserved. The local cultures, the local practices of the people were employed by IPTA and given a more refined forms. For instance, IPTA Bombay made use of the Marathi tamasha and paura as forms of expression. Similarly, the Bengal artists employed jatra. In Kerala, traditional forms like Kathakali were taken out of the temple surroundings and staged before larger audiences with new themes. The style of Kathakali was retained, but embedded in the style was the contemporary issues. So, the fusion of a traditional art with contemporary incidents and contemporary events is what that made IPTA different. Now, all this was of course done to enhance connection with the rural masses so that the masses could easily feel drawn to the IPTA movement. Now, in Andhra Pradesh, similarly, Burakheta and Hari Katha were often used to educate the public about the significance of contemporary events and to invoke solidarity and patriotism among the people. The people, most of the rural people, had no access to what was happening around them, and IPTA devised potent mediums to put before them these contemporary happenings. And it was in this context that Bijon Bhattacharjee made the play Nabanno in the background of the 1943 famine, which became a landmark in the history of Bengali theatre. Did the adoption of popular forms of cultural expressions contribute to IPTA's widespread reach? Yes, as it has been made evident, this free adoption of regional forms of cultural expressions gave IPTA widespread popularity, and the impact of it was not just confined to Calcutta and Bombay. It flourished all over the country with a large number of regional variations. It made possible for the emergence of a large number of theatrical forms from various regions. It gave each of them recognition. And the organization and the staging of the dance dramas like The Spirit of India, India Immortal, and the epoch-making Bengali drama Nabanno established the position of the IPTA that was to inspire the generations to come. What we see is that from the early 40s, there developed a close relationship between the IPTA and the cinema, which was both intense as well as it was cerebral. Now, as we all know that cinema in the early 40s was dominated by theatre. The acting was stage oriented, the dialogue was theatrical, and even the manners of the actors within the frame was quite theatrical. IPTA had a link with this cinema particularly with its ethos of reaching out to the peoples with people's theme. Now, Hrithik Ghatok's first film Nagorik, made in 1953, though not released, bears the full imprint of his Marxist faith and his IPTA involvement. Hrithik Ghatok changed his medium from literature to theatre and later to film. He felt that theatre was a much more potent medium than literature because it had the ability to change the minds of the masses more easily. That is, it could create more impact on the masses than literary pieces could. And what he felt was that even more potent than theatre was cinema, because he felt that the way cinema could mold the minds of the masses, it had no parallel. Now, what we see in the early part of the 1940s and late 1940s, the search for identity that had already brought a new life to literature and other art forms, that was quite missing in cinema. But change was gradually happening. During this time, cine clubs began to be established, drawing inspiration from the Soviet cinema. The filmmaking community, however, was culturally till then underdeveloped, and there was somewhat special lack of creativity. However, the IPTA movement having a great impact on cinema making, brought about realism in cinema as well. This was evident in cinemas like Bimal Ray's Udayer Pothe of 1944, Nimai Ghosh's Chinnamul of 1951, Hrithik Ghatok's Nagorik of 1952, Sholil Sen's Notun Yehudi of 1953, Shotten Boshe's Rickshawala of 1955, among others. Now, is it what that heralded what is called the new wave in cinema? Yes, it did. If we look at the scenario of Calcutta, a lot of developments were happening. For instance, the first development was the founding of the Calcutta Film Society in 1947 by Satyajit Ray, Chidananda Dasgupta, Harisadhan Dasgupta, etc. The second was, of course, Jar Renoir's visit to film The River. And the third was the International Film Festival of India of 1952. These were definitely major landmarks of Calcutta's discovery of world cinema. Now, film societies now took the task of creating an audience for new cinema. The realist trends in Indian films gained impetus from the 1952 International Film Festival held in this country. Just when the early sporadic attempts at realism seemed to be waning out under the impact of Hollywood films that tried to give the people an escape route from all the drudgery and misery. Huge crowds were drawn by films from the Soviet Union, People's Republic of China, Italy, Japan, etc. at the festival. This showed that the Indian film goers, tired of Hollywood, were eager to see on the screen the lives of the common people, the story of the common people in their everyday struggle. The significance lies in the fact that it emerged in the post-war period of increasing economic and political pressures and the gathering momentum of the people's movement towards a struggle of a better life, battling all odds. In Hindi films, Bimal Ray was able to sweep aside the cobwebs of old traditions and usher in a new phase wholly suited to the cinema. His Do Bigha Zameen reverberates in the minds of those who saw it and remains undoubtedly one of the landmarks of Indian cinema. there was a close relationship, as has been made clear by the IPTA, between the IPTA and the new wave in cinema. Films could be looked at as an aspect of the IPTA movement. Theatre and films were parallel streams, each influencing each other. In 1946, Dhatti Ke Lal could draw Balraj Sahani, Shambhu Mitro, Ravi Shankar, Krishan Chandra at a common platform. Balraj Sahani, a celebrated actor of the Hindi movie world who was associated with the IPTA movement, in his memoirs narrated his own personal experiences of involvement with IPTA and Progressive Writers Association. It was made clear in his memoirs that these movements influenced him as it did the other intellectuals of the time. And what we see is that the films of that period became far more realistic, such as Mazdoor. An example of this is Mazdoor of 1945, a film by Nitin Bose. In fact, what we see is that this realism that was the basic characteristic of IPTA, that was transferred to the films. Often it has been mentioned that Satyajit Ray's Pather Pachali depicts social realism. Of course it does. But this trend was already there a decade earlier in the 1940s. Charu Roy's film Bengali, that was produced in 1939, is noteworthy in this context. A number of films can be named since the 40s, which happened to be the precursor of Pather Pachali. Films like Achyut Kanya are noteworthy in this context, where the class angle was highlighted alongside universal humanism. Conflict between worker, employer, Jomidar, Jotdar, peasants, and various other issues came to the fore. Gradually, the people who were till now marginalized, their stories came to be mirrored in this cinema. In 1941, a film like Naya Sansar by Khwaja Ahmed Abbas initiated a new trend of cinema. And K. Abbas or Khwaja Ahmed Abbas was also directly linked to IPTA, being one of its founder members. Other films like Udayer Pathe, Dhatti Ke Lal, Nicha Nagar, Tathapi, they also utilized several components which were later seen in Pather Pachali. But that does not mean that one can negate the fact that Satyajit Ray's films signaled a major radical departure in cinema. For over a decade, Satyajit Ray remained as an isolated genius whose grand stature was of little help in creating a significant environment in which his kinds of films could be remade by other filmmakers of talent in India. Now, in 1969, the situation began to change when a new cinema was heralded by the appearance of Bhuvan Shom, a film directed by Mrinal Sen, another filmmaker from Bengal. Like most of the filmmakers of this new movement, Sen finds Satyajit Ray's treatment of colossal poverty in India to be romantic and any suggestion of its inevitability utterly unacceptable. Sen's films like The Interview, Ek Adhuri Kahani and others are on the whole angry and highly political works. But not all the new wave cinemas are of that sort. Others look at their individual characters from a more complex social milieu that defies a simple analysis and hence an easy solution. T.P. Reddy's remarkable film Sanskar, Kantilal Rathor's Kanku and Girish Karna's Vrangsha Vriksha are some other works. There are still others which deal primarily with human relations on an intimate personal level. Basu Chatterjee's Sara Akash, Shivendra Sinha's Fir Bhi, Prem Kapoor's Badnaam Basti and Basu Bhattacharya's Anubhav are some of these. we see is that with the new wave and with the popularity of cinema, theatres were now transformed into cinema, and audiences forgot their exclusive loyalty to drama. Giants like Prithviraj Kapoor poured his film earnings into theatre. Thus, these two parallel streams, theatre and cinema, had the same perspective, experimenting, technically exploring, and sometimes overlapping. At a later stage, we find Deena Pathak, Utpal Dotto, Nasiruddin Shah, A.K. Hangal, Mrinal Sen, and many others creating a space both in theatre and films. Thus, they oscillated between the two mediums. But all said or done, the new wave in cinema is an extension of the trend initiated by the People's Theatre move. And of course, it needs to be situated in the changing times. The late colonial phase and the early period of independence saw a new society emerging. It was in accordance with the changes in the society that cultural expressions also changed, and this was reflected in the theatre and films. Thank you.